Welcome to the course ENG 407, Language and National Development. Through this course, we shall look at the role of language in shaping national identity, culture, and social cohesion. We shall examine how language policies and planning can impact a nation's economic, political, and educational development. Through the course, we are also going to evaluate the challenges involved in balancing linguistic diversity with the need for national unity and development. This course will take us through a discussion on the relationship between language, power, and social inequality, and how language can be used to include or marginalize certain groups of individuals within a country. By the end of the course, so it is expected of you to have developed the ability to critically assess language-related policies and programs and their implications for a nation's development trajectory. It is also expected that by the end of this course, you will have been empowered to become informed citizens and advocates for language related policies that support a nation's sustainable and inclusive development. This is the first lecture as far as ENG 407 is concerned. And because the course is a combination of two concepts, language and national development, it is a good thing for us to start with uh, describing the word language, the concept of language. According to Sapir 1921, language is described as a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions, and desires by means of a system of voluntarily produced symbols. What are the things we look at there? Language is purely human, something that is peculiar to humans. It is non-instinctive. It's not that one um, is using it because is given birth to by a particular set of individuals. We use it. What do we use it for? We use it to communicate ideas, emotions, and desires. And language itself is a system of voluntarily produced symbols. So, from the definition, we can identify that language is a uniquely human phenomenon which is not shared by other species like birds, like fish, like animals, and so on. It is a learned and voluntary method of communication, not an innate instinct. The fact that one is given birth to by someone who can speak does not mean that one will automatically begin to speak it. So we have to acquire it. So it is systematic. It uses a systemic symbolic representation to convey meaning, ideas, feelings, and intentions. So when we talk about language, we are talking about a phenomenon that is specifically meant for humans. And what do they use that for? To communicate, convey ideas, feelings, emotions, and intentions. And it's not just something that is used haphazardly or anyhow, it is systematic in the way it is used. That's language for you. We now move to some things that make language as um, something that is unique to human to be different or unique to a point that other species cannot make use of it. That's why the course progresses into looking at properties of human language. That is, what are the things that characterize the human language? What are the things that make the human language unique? What are the things that the human language contains that make it, that is the language, difficult for other species outside human beings to make use of? We'll be looking at them one after the other. The first one is arbitrariness. When we say arbitrariness, we're talking about the signifier, that we use, the word we use, does not have any relationship with what it signifies in the human experience, in the real world. So when we mention a word, a signifier, there is no particular relationship between that signifier and what it signifies in the real world sense. There is no relationship between a word and what it signifies. For example, if you say bottle, bottle is a word, but there is an object in the real world that stands for the word bottle. If that object is not has not been regarded to be a bottle, if it has been called a printer, that is what it will have been called. So there is no specific relationship between the word bottle and the object that is considered to be a bottle. So that is one thing about language. In every language, things are called by names or words that they do not share some specific characteristics. Uh, if another name has been given to that particular object, that object might be regarded as that word that is being used for it. So that's why we say one of the characteristics of language is arbitrariness. The next one is productivity or creativity. As far as human beings are concerned, every normal human being has the capacity to produce unlimited number of words, sentences, infinite sentences based on limited resources, linguistic resources that are available. We have words in English being put together in an English dictionary. They are limited words. They can be numbered. But those words can be used to produce as many sentences as possible. In fact, sentences we have not heard before, one can produce them. So that's why we consider human language to have the quality of creativity, because humans are continually creating new expressions and novel utterances by manipulating their linguistic resources to describe new objects and situations. Anything you have not seen before, when you see it, you can describe it, you can say something about it. You can use the words that are available to you to produce sentences possibly you have not produced before. So when you use something like that, the property of language that you have exploited is creativity or productivity. That is, we have, as it were, an open sheet ahead of us that we can fill with as many sentences as we can. The capacity is there for human beings. When we compare that with other species, we see that the way the goat we know in Nigeria is bleating, so the goat in America is bleating. They cannot add to what we have known them for centuries, for years we cannot remember. And as long as the world will continue to exist, there is no possibility that other species will be able to add sentences or words to what they have been producing. But human beings are not like that. When we find ourselves in a new environment, we have the capacity to create sentences that will fit in into that new environment. We look at another property of language, and that is cultural transmission. One of the things we use language to do is that we can transfer properties of our language or properties of our culture from one generation to another, from one place to another. So we language, human language has the capacity to sustain a language, to maintain, to sustain a culture, to maintain a culture, and to pass the same culture from one generation to another. Once a language is no more spoken, a language is dead. That means the culture of those who have that language, or individuals or group of individuals to whom that language belongs, is dead. They have no culture. There's no way their culture will be transmitted when the language or languages are no longer spoken. So we acquire a language in a culture with other speakers and not from parental genes. One can be given birth to in Nigeria, but if he's not a Nigerian and the language of his parents are not spoken in the Nigerian environment, it is the language of the people around him he will acquire and begin to use. And it may not, that means that he will not be so deep in the culture of his people. So we are not born with the ability to produce utterances in a specific language, such as English. We acquire our first language as children in a culture. It's the culture that surrounds us. It's the culture that is available to us. That's why if parents are able to transfer their language from them, from their generation to the generation of their children, automatically their culture will follow. So failure to transfer a language from a particular group of people or particular parents to another is denying the generation of children that will follow the opportunity to imbibe the culture, that language, that in which that language is used. So one of the characteristics or properties of language is cultural transmission. We also have duality. You know, anytime we hear the word duality, we are talking about something that is double in nature, that performs at least two functions, two levels of functions are included in one thing. So when we talk about language, particularly in speech production, we have physical level at which we can produce individual sounds, and then these individual sounds can be put together to form a word. Like the example we have here, we have at one level letters like NBI. If they are haphazardly arranged, they may not give us the kind of word that will be sensible to us. But when they are put together following the system of English language, we will get a word pen. So on one end, on one level, we have letters of the alphabet of a particular language. On the other level, these letters can be brought together to form words and sentences in that particular language. Not only that, we have speech sounds, like 44 speech sounds in English. These 44 speech sounds cannot do anything on their own. They are usually combined with other sounds to form words, and from words we form phrases, clauses, and sentences, and so on, of this higher level of discourse. So language is unique to humans because it can be used to perform dual functions, as we have mentioned. The next one is displacement. When we say displacement, it is possible for us to convey experiences we have had, experiences we are having, the experiences we expect to have in the future using language. So language has the capacity to convey information about concepts, events, situations that are not confined to the immediate spatial or temporal context. We can talk about what has happened in the past time, in the present time, and the future time. Animals cannot do that, other species cannot do that. No cow will come out to say that he's able to tell his shepherd that it is eating some grass, it's grazing. Uh, he went to the river yesterday. Why is not possible? Because as a cow, the capacity to use human language is not there. So language empowers us as humans to discuss abstract or remote ideas, ideas that are not close by, ideas that are not concrete, occurrences and circumstances that extend beyond the here and now. We can talk about the past, we can talk about the present, we can talk about the future using language. And that's what that is talking about when we mention displacement. Another thing about human language is discreteness. As in the sound segments utilized in different languages exhibit notable distinctions from one another. Like in English, we have 44 distinct speech sounds. So these speech sounds are what we make use of to produce words. So regardless of the apparent continuous flow of sound, speakers can discern and identify the specific sound segments within words in their respective languages. So if you have sounds like uh, pit, p, p, t. You have p, t. So we can put them together. We can look at the phonemes that form that we bring together to form the word pit. We separate them. Say phoneme one is p, phoneme two is phoneme three is t. So we have p, e, t, p, e, t. These are different phonemes. If you combine the three of them together, we can have pitch, and we can rearrange them. We can take p from the initial position to the final position, and t from the final position to the initial position to form a word like tip. So we move from pitch to tip. We can identify the differences that exist among phonemes. So that gives us the characteristic called discreteness. It is only in human language we can identify that. We also have system as one of the characteristics or properties of human language. Language is a system. Language has its own structure, is systematic. It's not something that is used anyhow. There are rules to follow. To put speech sounds together for the formation of a word or words, to put words together to form phrases, clauses, and to put clauses together to form sentences and a higher level of discourse. Everything is systematic. So language operates according to rules and systematic structure. There are components that are brought together from sound to word, from word to phrases, from phrases to clauses, from clauses to sentences. So if these are not arranged systematically according to the provided rules for that language, the utterances that will be produced will not be acceptable. It will be considered, they will be considered to be incorrect or basis for errors. So how we establish that an individual, group of individuals understand a particular language is the fact that they share the same rules for that language. They make use of the rules guiding that particular language. And then what Mr. A tells Mr. B makes sense and is acceptable to Mr. B, and vice versa. So each language has its own set of rules for word and sentence formation. The rule governed nature of language means that any absence or incorrect arrangement of its components can disrupt the entire system. Once something is arranged the way it's not supposed to be arranged, that means that it will not be acceptable. It will not be considered to be correct. Where somebody should say he has gone, if the person decide to say he has go, that will be considered incorrect because it does not follow the system that is common to the use of English language. Another property of language we are looking at in this lecture one is species specific. Language is species specific, and what species is expected to be able to speak language or use language? It is humans. Other species like goats, like animals, birds, and the rest of them are not made to use language, particularly human language. It is only humans that have the capacity in their brain for production, processing, comprehension of language. And this is attributed to what Chomsky called language acquisition device, LAD. So it is something that is built up in every normal human child, that as the child comes to this world and grows, the capacity to use language is naturally endowed with that child. So that any child that is given birth to at the same time some other animals are giving birth to will come, and that child is normal, will come up to use, and is an environment where the language is used, will come up to use a particular language, while the other species that were giving birth to the same time with the child will continue using the bleating and word form of communication that is common to them, which is outside human language. So it is only the species of human beings, Homo sapiens, that have the capacity to use language. Another attribute of language is conventionality. The use of language is has to do with a convention, an agreement, an unwritten social agreement. A everyday use of language by a group of people, there is a law, a rule that is unconsciously written in the heart or the mind of those who use the language that they have to follow. So this is a convention. This is what is generally acceptable to those who use the language. Any effort to move outside of that convention will make whatever is going to be said unacceptable, incorrect, or to be an error. So this attribute signifies that there is no inherent connection between a word and its reference, which we have already mentioned. It is the people using the language that will say, this is what we call this, and everyone will be calling it like that. This is how we say this, and they will continue saying it. The moment somebody decides to call that thing on his own another thing, that idea will not be acceptable to the other people using the same language with such an individual. The next one is dynamism. Dynamism is dynamism. Language is dynamic. Language is dynamic. Dynamism. 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 Language is dynamic. Language is not static. Language grows. Language develops. can be expanded. Some things will be considered obsolete and go with some generation. Some new things will come to expand the vocabulary of the language. So the way a particular language was used about 5, 6 centuries before now will not be the same with the way it will be used in the contemporary world. New things are invented, new ideas will come up year in year out. Language has the capacity to accommodate new words and do away with things that are not no longer in use. So part of the properties of human language is the fact that it is dynamism. So that enables words to acquire new meanings and allow for the creation of new names for newly invented or discovered objects. Hundreds of years before, there was nothing like computer, there was nothing like social media, there was nothing like AI, artificial intelligence. But today, English language has been able to create space for those words to be part of the language. That is unique about human language. Other speeches don't have that. What they have said years before, what the generations, hundreds of years before now, thousands of years before now, have been using as a form of language for their speech is still what the speech is still using today. So the next one is learnability. Language can be learned. Language can be acquired. Even when someone has grown to a point where it's difficult to acquire a particular language, a person with some effort can still learn the language because, as earlier mentioned, God has put in every normal human being's brain the language acquisition device LAD that will help us to equip ourselves with the potential to learn multiple human languages. We have people who can speak 3, 4 languages, polyglots, those who can speak up to 10, 20 languages. So the human language is something that can be learned. That is one of the properties of the human language. The last of them is rapid fading. When we say rapid fading, this is like what we have said before. If language can accommodate new words, language can also do away with old words. Since language is dynamic, language goes with time. There are issues that are common with a particular generation that will have gone with that generation. So there may not be a reason for one to mention them if one in is no longer in that generation. So spoken words dissipate quickly without lingering in the air for an extended period. Well, new words come up for some specific reasons. Words that do the same thing we do some years before, we go with the generation. So when one is those who are using a particular language years before are no longer in existence, the form some of the things they make use of in their generation may not be present in the current generation of the speakers of the language. So that's one of the reasons language is very unique. If you pick up the King James Version of the Bible, you can see that the language spoken there is not the form of English that is commonly used nowadays. If not for the sake of making reference to some verses in that version of the Bible, hardly we can see somebody going about relating with others who will be using that form of English language. Now, in this first lecture, we have looked at what we set out to achieve by the time we will come to the end of lectures on this course. We have also looked at the definition of human language, what characterized the, the form of language. We looked at each of them, and then we've seen the reason why human language is species specific. That is not something that other species uh, can use, because they do not have the capacities that are helpful to human beings to use the human language. Some questions will come after this presentation. Go through the questions, provide the answers as correctly as you can. If you score less than 70, you will have to go through answering the questions again, because 70 is the pass mark. Scoring less than 70 will require you to go through the presentation again before you try to answer the question second or the third time, as the case may be. So thank you for listening. I appreciate you. We will meet for the next lecture.